Okay, welcome back to the channel, everybody. No video last week as I was coming up with the plan to do a three-part mini-series on global conflicts or global instability, you could call it. And I've identified three key areas where I think issues can arise or are currently an issue globally. My kind of take on it, etc. So let's take a walk on this beautiful day. We have got some sunshine again, finally. And starting with part one, that is probably the most obvious, and that is Ukraine. So first of all, I think before we get into the information, that it is really important that I think we pause and we park whatever our emotions are on this. And let's take the information in first and then apply emotion to it. And so let's get into it. So Ukraine, and I'm going to go right back here to the 11th century, where Ukraine has always had a history of being dominated by foreign nations. And in the moving forward to the 1300s, it was mostly Poland that controlled the Ukrainian lands, along with Lithuania. And they had sort of joint control through invasions, etc., etc. 1600s, Cossack uprising, which formed the Cossack Hetmanate, sorry, which was kind of like the first modern independent state status for Ukraine. And the Hetmanate then in 1654 become a vassal state of Russia. So you had an uprising in Ukraine, a man called Cossack, and it then 54 years later became a vassal state of Russia. And after 37 years of war between Poland and Russia over the lands of Ukraine, in the 1700s, it was finally confirmed that it was under Russian rule. And then in the 1900s, getting more up to date as we know it, obviously we've got the Soviet Union. And in 1939, Western Ukraine was annexed by the Soviet Union. And I don't know whether that kind of rings any bells to where we are today, which we'll cover in a minute. So, so the Soviet Union took over pretty much the Ukrainian lands as we know it now. How we doing now, right? And then in 1941, obviously now we're wartime, we're World War II, that the Nazis occupied until 1944. So once again, the Ukrainian lands are being pulled from pillar to post, and the Nazis walk in and take control as part of their domination, and sort of working towards Russia. And under Nazi Germany rule of Ukraine, 5 million Ukrainians died. 5 million Ukrainians. It's a really, really sorry history that the Ukrainians have. And this is just obviously a lot earlier on to where we are today. In the 1960s, post World War II, obviously, there was a resistance to Soviet rule for the Ukrainians. And in 1986, something that we all are very aware of because it was kind of a major event, was the Chernobyl disaster at the nuclear power plant. And in 1991, independence was declared after attempted coup in Moscow. So clearly, Russia had their own problems going on. And then in that, the Ukrainians seized the opportunity to seek independence. And then in 1994, President Kushma improved relations with Russia after they had soured over some years. And I'm hoping that I pronounce all the words and the names right here. So apologies if I do get any wrong. In 2002, there was a hung parliament, and amongst claims of electoral fraud. And then again in 2002, Ukraine launched a bid to join NATO. So they're clearly seeking securities. 2005, mass protests, rigged elections, and the Supreme Court actually ruled the result annulled. So here we are in the 2000s, and things are really starting to erupt again for the Ukrainians. And in 2006, President Yushchenko was declared president, and the Russian relations sour again. And we're getting up to modern day now. 2010. Just 2010. It's not an awful long time ago, really, but the NATO bid was abandoned. Okay, so we fast forward to 2013, and this is where it becomes very relevant to obviously where we are now. So this is kind of the beginnings that build up to it. So in 2013, there was mass protests at the government, and their decision to abandon the association agreement with the EU suddenly. So out of nowhere, that got abandoned, and there was mass protests. This is in 2013. And the then president Yanukovych then fled to Russia in 2014, which also coincidentally was the year that Russia decided to annex the Crimea region. And then it's been unstable really kind of since, but not an awful lot happened until 2022, when President Putin announced that he was going to be doing a special military operation. And that is when we saw Russian troops marching in onto Ukrainian lands, and they actually went for Kiev, and well, it was a bit of a disaster really from a Russian standpoint. They sent a lot of vehicles, a lot of troops in, and they were clearly a little bit rusty. A lot of the vehicles were poorly maintained, broke down, and they didn't have the supplies for the reach. So there wasn't a supply chain following up, bringing in fuels and supplies for the military personnel. And so they got very close to Kiev, and I remember the world watching intently. But they didn't succeed, and they ended up retreating and focusing their efforts on eastern Ukraine, where you could argue they've had some success But then I think it's probably a fair argument to say that Ukraine have put up a bloody good fight so far. So, why Ukraine? Well, I guess one of the reasons President Trump has very recently made clear, and that's the minerals. There are a lot of minerals, rare earth materials in Ukraine. Around about 5% of the world's rare earth minerals are in Ukraine. And this includes graphite, titanium, lithium. Think about your EV batteries, and uranium. So some really, really important materials in Ukraine. But also, they have highly fertile soil. The soil in Ukraine is really, really good for growing. And Ukraine was one of the top wheat producers. I believe they produce a lot of sunflower crop for sunflower oils. So you've got some really, really good lands there for the minerals, for the soils. So you can see why it's fought over. And so you've got the Ukrainian people that are just bang smack in the middle of it, victims of their lands. Trump recently said that he estimates 1 million Russians to have died in this conflict and 700,000 Ukrainians. And all for what? I think if you look at it from a Russian perspective, they have lived in lands that have constantly been invaded because they're so open. And when you look on a map at Moscow's geographic location to Eastern Europe and to more recently NATO, they're clearly getting a little bit uneasy about the whole situation. And so they're trying to expand to protect themselves, I believe. And that's not me justifying their actions at all, but it's just me trying to reason with why they're doing what they're doing. And of course, I think you can assume that Vladimir Putin would like to see a return to the days of the Soviet Union and the lands that they had, the power that they had. So that's from the Russian perspective. So how do we fix it? How do we stop all these people dying? How do we stop the innocent Ukrainian people living in horrible conditions, especially in eastern Ukraine? I mean, it's a Ukrainian lands really is a tug of war right now between NATO, Europe, and America, and on the other side, obviously Russia. So Ukraine is a country. Nobody can take that away. They have their own economy. Nobody can take that away. So almost like between the two Koreas, I don't know why we couldn't explore some sort of demilitarized zone in the lands of Ukraine, and that we could make guarantees of no NATO expansion, no annexation by Russians, so that Ukraine can carry on the lands that they are, the economy that they have, and neither parties will encroach on that land. And it's really difficult because, as I say, and some people say, Russia sees this as an existential threat and that they have to expand, that they need them lands for their own security. And if that's the case, well then, unfortunately, it's not going to have a happy ending. And of course, despite what some recent comments have been made, it's quite clear that Russia did in fact invade Ukraine, and so it's only right that I think they pay their part towards building Ukraine up, which is absolutely crazy, really, because there's so many Russian-speaking Ukrainians. They're not far from being the same culture, really, the same people, and they're just people. Just at presidential level, of all sides, all countries, it's the empathy that's gone is just disgusting. It really is. And so, yeah, so a very sad history for Ukraine. And I guess in a nutshell, they've been here before. And they're here again. And we just don't seem to learn the lessons from the past here. And we don't seem to have any empathy for life, for the people that live on these lands. And so Ukraine has consistently been the rope in a tug of war, and is again today. So that's my thoughts on it, really. Let me know your comments, and part 2 will be coming up next week. Thanks for watching.